This is my kitchen table, and it's also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
Well, I watch your interviews, so I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said, fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? One of the most interesting political stories in recent years has been occurring not in Washington, but in my home state of Maryland, where somebody who had never been elected to anything before became the governor of the state twice, and he's a Republican in a heavily Democratic state. He is very popular, in fact, one of the most popular governors in the United States. And now everybody's waiting to see what he's going to do after his term as governor finishes. For those who don't know your background, it's quite interesting, and I'd like to go through it for a moment. So you grew up in Maryland. Your father had the same name, Larry Hogan, Lawrence Hogan, and he was a member of Congress. And as a member of Congress, a Republican on the House Judiciary Committee, he cast the first vote against the Richard Nixon in favor of being impeached.
And as much as it pains me to say it, he should be impeached and removed from office.
Was that very difficult for him to do?
Well, it really was, David. I learned a heck of a lot about integrity and public service from my dad, and it was that one particular moment that I was most proud of him for. It was a difficult decision. He was the first Republican in Congress, the first one on the House Judiciary Committee to come out for Nixon's impeachment, first one to say that publicly, and he was the only Republican in Congress to vote for all 3 articles of impeachment. But it was a defining moment for him. It was a very difficult thing with a lot of people very angry, but I think history remembers him well. But you know, my dad was running for governor of Maryland in 1974, and he lost the race due to that vote. Republicans were really angry with him. And so when I was sworn in, when I was elected in 2014, my dad happened to be there. I was proud that he was still around to see it. And I said, Dad, it may have taken us 40 years, but we're finally going to have a Larry Hogan in the governor's mansion. So, you know, I finally fulfilled his right. Goal.
So when you were younger, you were a teenager, your parents divorced and you went to live with your mother in Florida. And you went to Florida State University, and you had some jobs, I guess, working at beach-related places, selling suntan lotion and other things like that. So what is wrong with that lifestyle? You're living on the beach, you're surfing, a lot of parties, a lot of girls down there, apparently was a lot of fun. Why did you move back to my home state, Maryland, which it's a great state, but why didn't you just stay in Florida?
That's a great question. I'm still asking myself, you know, other than, I mean, being governor is the greatest job that I've really ever had, except for maybe the lifeguard in Florida selling suntan lotion, you know, during spring break. That was a pretty good gig, but, right. You know, I figured I had to grow up. That was a nice thing to do in high school and in my early college years. But, you know, my dad said I had to get a real job and grow up. So I came up back to Maryland and worked for a lot less money and had a lot less fun than I did down in Florida on the beach.
Well, one of the things you did was you ran for Congress against Steny Hoyer, now the House Majority Leader, and actually for a Republican in a district that was your father's district previously, you did reasonably well. But after you lost, why didn't you say, I'm out of politics, I'm done, I lost, I'm just go back to business? Why didn't you say that?
I beat him in 4 out of 5 counties in the district, and they actually declared me the winner. He finally caught up the next day with some votes that came in from Prince George's County, right outside of Washington. But Steny, I've been in Congress ever since, and I was a 30-something-year-old kid at the time. So I then went back to focus on business, and I thought I had sworn off politics. I mean, I still was involved in helping other people, and I still cared about decisions that were being made, but I didn't have any desire to run for office again until 22 years later.
So you go back to your real estate business you had already had, and it was doing quite well. And then there were some financial problems in the United States. This is, I guess, the late 80s. And your business actually had to file bankruptcy. And what did you do? How did you pick yourself up off the ground?
It was a low point. I think you learn a lot more from the struggles and the tough times in life, and that was certainly one of them where I hit rock bottom. I had worked really hard to start a business in the basement of my townhouse to build up a fairly successful company, and it was a tough time. The savings and loan industry was collapsing, home building and development businesses were filing bankruptcy all across the country, and many of my clients were doing the same. Many of my lenders were going under. And so, it didn't give me any solace that I wasn't alone or that it wasn't really all my fault, but it was a difficult time to go through, and I just had to start all over from scratch. I mean, I had nothing, but I think I learned a lot about struggling and overcoming adversity and understanding what people go through when they go through a difficult financial time like that.
So when you decided to run for governor, did people say, Larry, you're a really nice guy and you've overcome the bankruptcy in real estate and you're successful again in your business, but you ran for Congress once and you lost. You haven't been elected to anything ever in Maryland. And why are you doing this? Did people tell you were a little bit crazy?
Almost everyone told me I was completely crazy, not a little bit crazy. Look, we had only elected one Republican governor in 50 years, and he only served one term. And it got much worse in Maryland since then, and the odds were even stacked against any Republican having any chance of winning statewide, particularly one that most people never heard of, that had never held elective office. And so, I talked to a lot of my friends and colleagues and family and, my clients and business associates. And, a couple of them said, when I said, I'm thinking about running for governor, and they said, really, what state? Like, where are you moving to? But we overcame the odds. It was the biggest surprise upset in America in 2014.
Now, you were running against the then Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, who was an African-American who had gone to Harvard, and I think Harvard Law School as well. And he'd been the Lieutenant Governor for 8 years. The odds-on favorite to win, and Maryland has a very high percentage of African-American voters. How did you win?
I kind of was elected in spite of being a Republican because I focused on the issues that most people cared about, and that was helping our small businesses grow and putting more people back to work and turning our economy around and growing out of a big deficit that the state had. And it resonated. We worked really hard. It was a grassroots effort. I was outspent by I think 12-1 by the incumbent. Nate Silver, 538, the famed political prognosticator, gave me a 96% chance. This is a week before the election, a 96% chance of losing by between 8 and 12 points, and we ended up winning by 5 points instead.
All right, so you get to be elected governor, and then early on there was a crisis in Baltimore, the biggest city in Maryland, and the crisis was that a person who had been arrested was put in a police paddy wagon, and he died in that wagon, more or less. His name is Freddie Gray, and produced a lot of riots in Baltimore. And you are the governor. Did you just say to the mayor, fix this problem, it's a Baltimore problem, or did you get involved, and was it controversial to get involved?
Well, I had it was 90 days after I was sworn in, and so I'm still kind of a new baby governor. And then the worst violence in 47 years broke out in our largest city of Baltimore. The city was in flames. It was really out of control, and the mayor was not responding. And so, the business owners, the city residents were scared. The city police force was overwhelmed. I immediately declared a state of emergency. I called up the National Guard, and we sent in 1,000 extra police officers and 4,000 members of the National Guard, and we brought peace and calm to the city. We allowed the peaceful protesters to continue safely for a solid week, but no more violence took place. And then I walked the streets of Baltimore for a solid week, went to Freddie Gray's neighborhood, went into the places with the burned out shop owners and listened to the concerns of city residents, and we tried to lower the temperature. And frankly, it was a prelude to what we've seen in this past year with violence protests in cities across America, where I don't think they handled it the same way, which I think we did very effectively.
Shortly after you were elected governor, you found out that you had stage 3 lymphoma, and you had nodules, lymph nodes that were cancerous throughout your body. And so, A, how did you find out that you had cancer? And did you think actually that maybe you weren't going to survive?
Well, yeah, I had just been governor for 150 days, and I was on a trade mission to China, Korea, and Japan, and I wasn't feeling so good. I was feeling a little run down, and I noticed a little thing popping out of my neck, my throat. And so I went to the doctor and checked it out. It came as a complete surprise. I just thought I was, working a little too hard, and I didn't think it was anything serious, but it was pretty advanced and aggressive cancer, which came as a shock. But I was as transparent as possible with the people in Maryland, and I went through a pretty tough, 6 months of 24-hour-a-day chemotherapy in the hospital, and then another year of kind of maintenance chemo after that wreaked havoc on my body. But thank God I'm 100% cancer-free.
So when you come down with stage 3 lymphoma, and you're the governor of a state with a lot of responsibilities, did you say, well, maybe I just won't be the governor, I'll step down for a governor, I'll give the lieutenant governor the job? Did you ever consider any of that?
Well, so, the first thing I had to do, I got the diagnosis on Father's Day weekend, and I had to go home and tell my wife and my 3 daughters and my dad, that was tough. And then right away after that, I had to come tell, my staff and my cabinet and lieutenant governor, and then I wanted to tell the 6 million people that had just voted for me that, that I was going through this. I wanted to be transparent.
A few days ago, I was diagnosed with cancer.
And they asked me that at the first press conference. They said, are you going to step down? And I said, look, I'm going to try to go through this and continue to do my job as best I can and fight through it, just like everybody else who has cancer. I committed to do a job, and I was going to try to do it. I just kept working from the hospital, worked right through the treatments. I mean, sometimes it was difficult. A lot of my team stepped up and helped and took on more responsibility. But I decided I was going to try to fight through it, and I'm glad I did. And I think it set an example for some other people who have told me that they were inspired by the fact that I kept fighting through it, which is what everybody has to do that goes through cancer.
So when you're the Republican governor of a state like Maryland, and you say, I want to get this through the legislature or that through the legislature, I assume you can get anything you want because the legislators just listen to you. Is that right?
Well, sure, that would be in my dreams. That's the way it would work. But, it is tough. And I think that Charlie Baker, and Governor of Massachusetts, and it's not, everybody says most popular, but really we have a high job approval rating. So they may not think, it's not just a popularity contest, but people approve of the job we're doing. And I think it's because the nature of, we can't get anything done in our states unless we reach compromise, unless we find that common ground where we can all stand together. And it's what we do. We've accomplished a lot in our states, and you only do it through bipartisan, common sense solutions, by reaching across the aisle. And it turns out that's really popular among Republicans, Democrats, and independents in every demographic group. Whether you're white or black, whether you're a suburban woman, whether you're young or old, people say that's what we want.
So you're a very popular governor of Maryland, but the state is still a very big Democratic state. You're running for re-election, and even though you're a popular governor, the odds are still against you. People are saying you're not going to get reelected. You're running against a former head of the NAACP, African-American, who had been born, I guess he'd grown up in Baltimore. How did you happen to win that election?
Well, so we had, I think, done a really good job over 4 years. And as you mentioned, my approval rating was really high in the 70s, 78% or something, 70-some% of the people of Maryland approved of the job I was doing. But in spite of that, they were not going to vote for me. I was dealing with the blowback from President Trump, who had a 28% approval rating, nearly 50 points below mine. Some people were holding it against me, and we ran a campaign to say, look, I'm different than Donald Trump, and you can't, punish me because of my party affiliation. Look at the things we've done and that we've accomplished together. And so Maryland has the highest percentage of black voters of any state outside of the South, and I'm running against the national president of the NAACP in a heavily Democratic state, and we ended up winning in a landslide in a very blue year, in a very blue state. I ended up getting more votes than any other governor of any party in the history of our state.
you have said recently that the virus that is coming back, COVID-19, is coming back in a more virulent state than it was before. So what is the situation in Maryland? And are you talking to other governors, and are they saying they're also worried they might not have enough vaccines, PPE, and hospital beds?
Well, look, this is something we've all been dealing with for nearly 9 months now. And, as much as we'd all like to get back to our normal lives, the honest truth is that some of our darkest days are still ahead of us. The virus is spiking out of control all across the country. We're still in better shape than many states, but the virus does not recognize state borders, and it keeps coming back around and moving around the country. However, the good news is there is light at the end of the tunnel. Operation Warp Speed and the vaccine is really way ahead of schedule. And it's like the cavalry is coming to the rescue. It just is not going to happen as fast as we would like.
So when the first wave of the virus came, the governors were supposed to be cooperating, and you were then the head of the National Governors Association, and you brought them together from time to time. But in the end, they were kind of competing a little bit for PPE and other things because they couldn't get tests, they couldn't get equipment. So you would anticipate that will happen now, that governors are going to fight each other to kind of sneak around and kind of get more vaccines than they otherwise are entitled to?
Well, this was kind of uncharted territory when we were at the beginning of this crisis back in the spring, and I was pretty frank about some of my concerns, about the lack of coordinated response in Washington, and it was kind of a mess. We were all building entire infrastructures from scratch, but the good news is we're miles ahead of where we were. Now I'm not critical of where we are. I think there's a really good cooperation between the federal government and all the states. They have a plan. No governors are going to be able to go around the back door and get vaccines from, without going through the process. Everybody's going to get them, and in the same pro rata manner, and each state has submitted plans to the CDC about how we're going to prioritize who gets them first, starting with our most vulnerable populations in our nursing homes and our frontline healthcare workers, and then as we get them, we kind of move down the list to the people that are most vulnerable.
I guess private equity people won't be on the top of your list, right?
Well, we can see. It depends on if you have comorbidities or, if you've got some health issues, we might be able to move you up the list. If you're of a certain age, you're probably too young, but we'll see.
I wish I were, but many people in this country have said, in fact, a recent Gallup poll said, I think about 40% of Americans don't want to take the vaccine. Dr. Fauci has said, unless you get 70 to 80% of people vaccinated, you really don't have the benefit of herd immunity. So how are you going to convince people to take it?
I think that we're better now than the polls that were just a few weeks ago. There was this miscommunication about some people had the impression that it was being rushed in an unsafe way. And now people are feeling a little more comfortable as more information comes out. With the change in administration, everybody together saying the vaccine is good and works and is important. But it's going to take some convincing, because you're right, we have to get to about 70% vaccination if we want to stamp it out, and you can't have 60% of the people saying they won't take it.
Are you ready to announce today that you're running for president in 2024?
Well, that would really break some news. Your show would get more, a lot of eyeballs if we said something like that, David.
Talking about politics for a moment, after you were elected governor and you were helped by a Republican governor at the time, Chris Christie, then Republican governor of New Jersey, when he ran for president in the year 2016, you supported him. Then when he dropped out, he endorsed Donald Trump, and he tried to get you to endorse Donald Trump, and you said no. In fact, you never did endorse him, even when he was the nominee of the party, and you didn't vote for him. Was that a little awkward when you were trying to go into the White House as the head of the National Governors Association?
Well, not really. Well, first of all, Chris Christie and I are good friends, but we don't have to agree on everything. But I think, in spite of all of that, I think, the relationship was pretty good. Like the president got a little testy a few times when he didn't like me speaking up on certain topics, and I wasn't kind of always drinking the Kool-Aid. But I tried my best to never be, attacking the president, regardless of who the president is. I want to work together with them. And chairing the National Governors Association, I brought together in a real bipartisan way all the governors of the states and territories, speaking with one voice, in many cases unanimously, pushing for certain things. And while sometimes the president may have bristled if we didn't just compliment him on everything, for the most part, the whole team was very cooperative.
As a Republican, after Trump was elected president the first time, and you didn't support him, you didn't vote for him, you worked with him when he was president, you flirted, according to your own book and other accounts, with running against him for the Republican nomination in 2020. So why did you decide in the end not to run for the nomination?
Well, honestly, it was not, I don't know if flirting is the right way to put it. There were people trying to encourage me to do it. I never really formed an exploratory committee. I didn't aggressively go after it, but after I was reelected in 2018 in the bluest state in the country, when many of my Republican colleagues across the country were losing, when we lost the House of Representatives and lost state legislative bodies, and we did really well appealing to suburban women and minorities and crossover Democrats and independents. And so, when I was inaugurated for the second time, Jeb Bush came up and introduced me and gave a speech where he talked about me being the antithesis to Washington and what's going on, and the way we've been able to get things done in a bipartisan way. And that sort of took on a little bit of a, people started saying, what about this guy? How does he do that? How do you, reach a wider audience in a bigger tent? And how do you get things done in a state that's 2/3 Democratic? And how do you get reelected when everyone else lost? So it took on a life of its own. I was frustrated in many respects with my party and with some of the things that I thought the president should be doing that wasn't doing, or some of the way that we were going about it. So I listened, but I never really took any serious aggressive actions towards running for president.
2024 will have another presidential election, and there are some people who are saying that maybe you should run in for the Republican nomination then, because you've proven you can win in a Democratic state. You're very popular. So are you thinking about it? Are you ready to announce today that you're running for president in 2024?
Well, that would really break some news. Your show would get more, a lot of eyeballs if we said something like that, David. But look, I'm flattered by the people suggesting that, and I'm not saying I would rule it out, but this is the honest truth. I mean, I've got a really important, difficult job that I love doing. We're in the middle of a twin crisis, the economic and health crisis, and I've still got this day job to do until January of 2023, and I'm going to try to stay focused on that. But I do want to be a part of the discussion about where we go as a party and where we go as a country, and so I'm going to continue to be involved and speak up and let people know what I think we should do. But I'm not ready to launch any campaigns.
If you don't run for president and your term is up, would you consider something important like private equity?
Well, if that's a job offer, David, I'd love to talk to you about it. I believe I probably, if I don't pursue some higher office, I likely will go back to the private sector. And, I've enjoyed most of my life as a businessman, and I miss that a little bit. I mean, this is a terrific job, and I feel like I'm working hard for the people I represent, and I think they're getting their money's worth out of me every day. But going back to the private sector wouldn't be such a bad idea either.